right. We're here today to talk a little bit about decision support systems. And what we thought we'd do, we give a bit of an overview and some metrics, since we are talking about metrics, about decisions in the country, in state and local courts. And then we will hone in on a suggestion for a model of decision support systems in the courts. And then use the model to segue into Orange County's initiative around decision support system examples that they've implemented over the last couple of years to create some real changes to the court. And then towards the end, what we like doing is talk a bit about what we have seen makes it more successful than not, to talk about some of the do's and the don'ts. And because it's a very small group, what we like to do is encourage all of you guys to just ask questions as we go. And don't be shy. I want to get into our presentation system. Oh, there we go. It does work. Data, right, is what we talk about a lot. There is a ton of data out there for sure. We've heard in earlier sessions how much data actually on the planet generates every day. In this context, however, for this session, we talk about court data or legal data. And we're not actually talking about the data because we need to take the data and make it into information. So we're going to talk about the data as a context of that data, make it into information so we can understand it better, and use that information in an aggregated way to inform. That's really what decision support systems are all about. Now, some of you might say, well, there's two different types. There's a descriptive system that tells you how things are, and that's a good thing. And then there are normative systems, at least in the literature, that tell you what you should be doing. You don't do that. What we do definite descriptive systems, and then we might eventually evolve into doing suggestive systems that will present those alternatives. Depending on how decisions actually are, might actually try to give a like kind of prognosis to the outcome. We're probably away with that. We're going to talk about that, but this is where things are going, at least in my personal view. So, let's bring some data. Why is this important? This is, the takeaway from this slide is that there's an amount of decisions being made every year in the state and local courts. This is driven by case filing statistics, assuming a certain number of decisions made by different people in different courts. And it's a very simple, straightforward model. But when you do the math of that model, you come to the realization there's just under 1 million decisions made every year in the state and local courts. You can use different assumptions, it could be less or a little bit more. I'm not going to dwell on this. The realization is a ton of decisions are being made all the time. You take that data, you spread it across case types. Not all that different. I mean, traffic and other are a little bit less. No wonder. It's a fairly automated process, a fairly straightforward process, right? When you look at the case flow diagram, it's one way. We got our payables, we got our master peers, and some other wrinkles attached to them that always happen. But then we sometimes count those in other case types. So I'm not going to get into that. But say 10 decisions are made every case, on average, right? That's the only takeaway I want to leave with you for this particular slide. This is an important one. And this, again, same data. Each judicial officer makes 90 decisions a day when he or she is sitting. Each court administration per court, this is an average. This does not hold true for any given court, but on average, a court administration each day makes 470 some decisions, right? Now think about what that means. Lots of impact for lots of things, right? Much of that is on a micro level, the case, but a bunch of that is also on a higher level, right? About resource assignments, security in the court, logistics, venue, all kinds of stuff. And even the clerk's office, records management, makes decisions all the time. So let's keep that sort of as a framework for what we're going to hear about over the next hour, 10 minutes. One thing I wanted to leave with you too, when we talk about decision-making systems and metrics, there's a couple of things that I find we forget sometimes.
And this is just to remind us, and you may agree or disagree, that's perfectly fine. There may be other ones that are not on here, and if so, please speak up. So feel free to do that. Better informed decision making, obviously. That's sort of one of the goals of decision support systems. Are the decisions better? Well, I'd love to see a study on that. I mean, that's a really interesting piece that I don't think we have really gotten to the bottom of. Improved triage in a high-volume environment. Well, if we know more about these cases and we have the matrices to compare and the benchmarks, are there new possibilities that this brings about? In my experience working with the courts, it often does, because once you divvy up the stream of things that come to you or that are in different phases of a case flow, a case life cycle, once you start visualizing that and putting numbers around them and indicating payload for each of these nodes that it's going through, people inside begin to think of this a little differently sometimes, as long as you can see it. Often in larger courts, the difficulty is you can't see it very easily. And if you can see it, it's hidden in reports, right? Tabs and columns, and you have to find your own pattern there. Better rules. If we have better decision support system, are we in a position to provide more timely and more qualified input into rule making and changes, proposed changes? I bet we do. I bet we would be able to say, hey, if we introduce that thing over here on mortgage foreclosures, that'll do this, and here's my evidence, right? So maybe we want to qualify this a little more. Maybe we want to suggest something that makes it still a rule change, but maybe a more easily implementable one, or one that has additional benefits. Okay, so this is about including technology much more so in those processes. What I personally love about decision support system and metrics is they don't ruffle feathers right away, because they cater to micro and macro at the same time, at least if you make it them that way. And what I mean by micro is the case level, the defendant in the courtroom, or in a case docket, whether it's paper or electronic, the single case or a couple of related cases. This is micro to me. Lots of opportunity there for decision support stuff. Not just how they move along and getting knowledge of the timely processing and the issues and how they're managed in the triage, but also what resources are needed, right? And when, and be able to plan for this ahead of time. The macro level can also benefit from that, and usually does, and that is really what we think about generally of operations, right? We talk about security in a courthouse, the dockets overall, the budget, the operation. So decision support systems really can cater to both. Even the same thing can cater to both. And we'll see a bit of that later. And then the last piece here, they can be very tactical in nature, in that they allow decision-making to benefit from one day to the next, immediately. You see something, you see a metric, you can react to it, you can respond to it. But at the same time, it can be very strategic, right? It can show you trends and things that will alert you to something that may not happen for another year or so, or another couple of months, or for another couple of case events until a large swath of something hits the docket, right? Because of a rule change or something like that. And the last piece is really important in this, we have so many different court systems here in this country. We all work differently in many ways, and yet at a level we all work the same. To me, decision support systems have this unique ability. We of course have to give it that ability, but nobody argues that a decision support system should implement the local legal climate. It should implement the local rules, the jurisdictional descriptions, the way people operate, the venues, large courthouse, small courthouse, many departments in different buildings or not. It's all part of the makeup of it. Because it is us who make them that way, and thus they are responsive to that. They are not a divider among different court systems. They're actually an element that can kind of tie them closer together, and that's what I like about them. I don't know, is there anything else that you guys can think about? Decision support system, what does that suggest to you? Any aspects? No? maybe later. I'll get back to you on that. All right. Just because it's after lunch, Snorri has a bunch of cards. Yes, he does. And what I'd like you to do is take one card each and take 15 seconds or 30 or whatever many you want, up to about a minute to answer these two questions. And you can, if you're running out of colored ones, we might be okay. Don't think about it much, okay? First question is, what are the 3 most important metrics for you? Okay? You personally, in your job, in your court. Think about that. Whatever they are, just write them down. Don't analyze it. How many here are not court administrators? Quite a few. Excellent. Yeah. And how many are not court administrators but still work in the courts? Excellent. Good. Okay. The next question is, what are the 3 most important metrics for whoever you report to? Whoever it is that you want to make happy and who has some direction over you. Could be your PJ, your president judge, your presiding judge. Could also be a court administrator. I don't know whoever you respond to. Write that down as well. How are we doing? A little bit of writing left. So 3 important metrics. Don't do more.
Can you give an example?
I'm sorry?
Can you give an example?
Can I give an example? Time to disposition. As a basic one, you might say the percentage of people that get the child support within the prescribed, within our limits. Whatever is important to you, right? I'm not saying one's more important than the other. I'm simply saying in your job, you might have this kind of ranking. Okay, once you've done that, there's one more question. And in order to answer that, turn your page over. Don't look at it again. Turn it over, other side, and answer this. This is about your superior officer. What do you think he or she thinks are your most important metrics? So, this is now you pretend to be him or her. What do you think she does? What do you think she thinks of when she looks at you and she says, I wonder if he or she is working on improving that? What is that? There is no test. Okay? We are not deducing anything but raw data from this, and we're going to publish this data in some sort of summary tomorrow or somewhere around where the registration booth is. It's really about what we think is important to us and what other people think is important to us and what we think the other people think. It's really that. It may be all the same. We don't know. We just wanted to do this exercise. Okay. Now, if you can move yeah, that's perfect. Over to the inside. If you take all the metrics, thank you so much, Estella. I appreciate that. Okay. Now, do you want to quickly talk about this?
No.
Or no? Okay.
I can if you want. These were, when we asked the same questions this morning of the group, these were the metrics in sort of ranked order. Again, to your point over here, right, what are you actually looking for? Well, that's just one of the points is that, different people are looking for different metrics. But these sort of bubbled up to the top. There were a ton of metrics that had like one vote, right? Somebody submitted a vote that I want tracking employee turnover is the most important thing. That's probably an HR person, right? But in general, these were the ones that bubbled up to the top. Do they resonate? I mean, are these similar to the ones that were on your lists? Okay.
If they're not, which I would like, we have systemic differences, right? Which would really intrigue us. But anyway, I want to guide you now. Let's get into the gist of things, I think, at this point. There is, when we think about decision support, or some of us at least, we really think about, and I'm going to walk you down the first column first. There is the operational aspect of saying, I get metrics and performance numbers out of my court operation that help me guide in how I manage the court, how I manage my staff, and so on, right? Think of it as a case flow across all the dockets, sort of in your head, with different gates reporting different kinds of values. This is like Star Trek in some ways, right? But the operation aspect of decision support systems is really about workflow and payload and time and quality of data, how often, how much does it cost, all the way to the end, and you start improving there, right? The judicial aspect of decision support systems there really are two aspects. One is the micro aspect. This is the case or the defendant or the matter at hand that is before a judge in the courtroom. So decision support here has the role of taking the relevant information and serving it up in an easy-to-consume fashion that allows the judge to make better informed decisions, right, as a core. Now, you may say, oh, that's not enough. I want to further automate that and add actionable pieces to it where he or she can issue orders and so on. And this is a trend. We see that in different courts. That is getting there. The other part of judicial decision-making is really about resource management for the court as a whole. How are we doing overall with our caseload? How are we doing with our resources? How are we doing with our budget? And how are we doing with our processes overall from a workflow perspective? So those two kind of seem separate, but in reality, what we find in court implementations, they really are very closely connected, judicial and operation, always. I will say that judicial decision-making systems, when they work, have a profound impact on operations. And Snorri, I think, has some information for us in that department. The other thing that that one needs to worry about is the three dimensions that are across the horizontal axis here. Decision support really takes data, right? What kind of data? Well, data, numbers. Sometimes you have to put them through a transformation process so they become more meaningful, but it's really data elements. Think of a citation, that kind of stuff. Right? So that's the first column here. The second one over, data, when it's available as a data element, is not enough. You want to get it out of documents, right? So you get it into e-filing kind of thing. But it's really about information that you need to harvest out of documents through whatever means. There are some case types that just don't work well for decision support unless you get to the documents, to what's inside the documents. And there's a third category that really where you need to add collaboration communication. So you need to worry about data, you need to worry about documents, and then you need to worry about who is communicating with who and when. This is, family and criminal, where you have social services involved and so on. It's sometimes not just a question of data and documents, but it's also about what kind of communication occurred or didn't occur, maybe more importantly so. Just a model for you guys to consider as we go into the Orange County examples. Okay, so we're going to look at, well, I'll let Snorri take over from here. There you go. Let me give you the clicker.
Okay, thank you. Okay, incredibly low-tech result tallying here. This group was was also concerned mostly around efficiency and time, and number 2 for this group was actually around budget. So metrics around dollars. Are we staying within budget? Is our funding correct? Sort of that broad category, and then quality was number 3. So slightly different, but there's definitely a lot of similarities. Okay, what I'm going to focus on initially, this is going to be broken into 2 parts. The first part is going to be around judge decision support systems. And then the second one will be about operational decision support. They share a lot of things in common from a design technical standpoint, but they're oriented toward different decision makers, and hopefully you'll see why that matters. Just to give you a little context on who Orange County is and what we're about, we're a large trial court. We service a population of 3 million people. We have a lot of initial filings, 600,000 filings, new cases each year. The bulk of those are in traffic and infractions, so we handle everything from that up to death row cases or capital cases. We have 132 judicial officers working at the moment. We have 146 approved positions, but we have a lot of vacancies at the moment. So we're busy. We have a big budget. We've been reducing just like everybody else has. The most important takeaway on this slide is if we were a state, we would be number 31. Right, we're right between Iowa and Mississippi in terms of size and volume. When we started down this journey of developing the workbenches for the judges, we spent a fair amount of time, organizing around some design principles. The first one was about context. So, when you're trying to orient someone to a decision, you need to make sure that they understand the context in which the decision is that's being made. So, in the case of judges, it's around cases and calendars, right? The second component or design philosophy that came through was this notion of drilling into data. So the other way to look at it would be we're going to aggregate every piece of information that a judge might want and figure out how to make it available to them so that they can drill to it just in time when they need it, but not to overwhelm them with too much information on one screen. Right? The third element was we really wanted to optimize this tool for the judge. This is the judge in civil treats data and documents and decision making differently than a judge in family law and a judge in traffic. To use those three examples and harken back to what Paul showed earlier on the types of decision support tools. Related to the drill into the data was hide the complexity, right? So you're going to see in a couple of the slides here in a second where we're aggregating lots and lots of information for the judge to have access to, but the screens do not overwhelm, right? And so once the judge gets comfortable with the layout of the screens, then it really is a tool that enhances the decision-making process. Timeliness is critical, right? So the tools have to be real time. You need to make sure the data is there. And then the final sort of design principle that we evolved to was some customization required, right? So IT people like to build standardized products and say, this is what you get, please be happy with it. Judicial officers are notorious for not wanting things in a box, right? So we decided that we would embrace that challenge and recognize that there's this unique partnership and collaboration that exists between the clerk and the judge in terms of understanding the unique nuances and preferences of a judge. And you'll see how that manifests itself here in just a little bit. So when we started out on this project, I'd like to tell you that we had great and noble goals, but we started this journey in about 2009, right when we saw that the budget climate was turning bad, and it was completely motivated and driven by efficiency. And really, it was that bottom one that we were after, right? We wanted to save money in the court. We knew that if we got to an all-electronic case file, that it would save a lot of money. Along the way, of course, you want to optimize this tool for the judge, right? You want to make sure that they are more efficient. Very difficult thing to talk about, but you want to make sure that they have the information they need and it's easy for them to get to. And then while you're optimizing the tools for the judges, you opportunistically look for ways that you can benefit the operational unit. So a quick example, in family law, a lot of continuances. The clerk's office does a lot of case prep, getting the case ready for the calendar for the judge, and then the hearing gets continued. In the old paper world, that work was lost. In the new electronic world, all that prep is there, so when the hearing shows up, a month later, the prep work is predominantly done, right? So those are little, tools and capabilities that we built in to benefit operations. But again, the core focus was on the judge. In case, I know there's one technologist in here, so this slide is for you, Winnie. I'm not going to go through all of the elements in here, but this is to show that when you're building decision support tools, in this case, judge decision support tools, there are a lot of moving parts, right? There's a lot of technology that's involved that you have to mask, right, and hide from the judge, right? They don't really care that you're using Oracle databases or your documents are in FileNet or you're using Active Directory for security. All they care about is I want a clean, crisp view that has the information in it the way that I want to see it. So that led us to designing 3 flavors of ELFs. So in Orange County, the judicial workbench is called ELF for electronic legal file. And of course, we have all kinds of fun with the name and the ELFs that are out there. But as Paul alluded to earlier, there are 3 sort of broad categories of decision support tools, right? There's data-driven decision support, data document-driven decision support, and then document and collaborative decision support, right, where you're involving other people in their input. So each of these has its own unique nuances and challenges, and they happen to fit very nicely in the 3 different types of ELVs that we're going to showcase for you today. So I'm going to quickly go through just a bunch of screenshots so you can just get a sense of some of the design elements that we have here, and hopefully it reinforces some of those points. So at a very, very macro level, Traffic ELF is constructed in a way that there's 3 zones on the page, right? So the judicial officer can see on the left-hand side, what's going on with my cases, my calendar load. The middle section is the case summary information, and the right-hand side is all of the supplemental information that's available as they need, if they need it. So if you drill down a little bit, right, so the dashboard, that left-hand portion of the screen, it's really about the department. This is Department C46 for some day of the week last week. And the system automatically, by default, clusters the cases together based on common attributes. So if we know that if the case management system indicates that there's an attorney associated with the case, we bundle those together because the judges typically like to hear the attorney cases first so that they can get the attorneys out of the courtroom and moving on to the other cases that they're dealing with. And if there's, complexities around exotic languages and things like that, they want to have that information. The judges can sort this information any way they want to, but by default, that's how it organizes. It's a little hard to see over here, but those little 2 and the C buttons that are over there on the side, 2 stands for second call, C means it's complete. So it becomes actually a working dashboard. So if the judge clicks complete, it falls off of the list here and it drops down below. You can see it if you scroll up and down, and there's a red line. If it's below the line, it's done, and the judge doesn't have to think about it. So the judges like that sort of feedback that they're getting throughout the day that I'm working through my cases. The middle section is the area, these are the data fields that the judges said was most important to them when making a decision on a case. And they thought that the majority of time they could make the decision based just on that little piece of data that's there in that main section. Now, if they want to drill into more information, they can go see it. If they wanted to verify that the person across from me is really 5'8" and has brown hair, they can look at the demographics. If they want to see the actual citation that was given, they can click to see that. If they want to get guidelines on, penalty assessments, that information is available to them. But by default, they start, with a very simple view that they can orient themselves quickly to, and then drill down, as needed. Okay.
Sorry, you've got there's an icon here on the right, traffic school. I'm sorry. What is that?
Yeah, so if the case is eligible for traffic school, the judge can click on that and see, what the parameters are on, it being available, or if it's not available, why. Okay. So a few other pieces of information that are available to the judge. If they want to go there, they can click on the DMV link and get into the details of what the DMV has to say about them. If they're contemplating reducing the fine, they can drill in and get some advice really quickly on the fly on minimum mandatories, right? So you have to at least charge this much, so you can't give it all away. If they want to, if the case is going to move on to a trial, they can get some guidance on, okay, these are the days that make sense for your calendar based on your vacation schedule, the officer's calendar based on his vacation schedule, and the days that, this police department normally shows up at our court. So all of that information is available. Again, the whole point is that, by and large, the judges don't consult it for the majority of the cases, right? But if they need to, it's there. So family, a little bit different. The screen orients at first with the calendar sort of display there on the left, just so you can navigate around. But the main portion of the website is dedicated to the calendar view. But at that calendar view, so I'm just showing you the first top level, if you will. That there is an awful lot of information available to the judge with just a single click, again, to quickly orient themselves. So we have something called the case information sheet. If they want to see just the quick info on that, they can get to it. we have this notion of calendar notes there, so they can see that, oh gosh, this guy has continued hearings 7 times, right? So it's a little note that the clerk sends to the court, to the judge, so that they can orient themselves quickly and perhaps change how they're going to manage that hearing in front of them. So lots of information, participants, if there's related cases, future hearings that are out there, all available at a click. But again, they predominantly just sort of start at this top level view. Now, like the traffic one, as they're working through their calendar for the day, as they move things down to complete or second call or continued or whatever, things drop below the line. So again, the judge always has a sense on, what's my work product for the rest of the day, and they really like it. Unlike traffic, which really has one document, which is the citation, family has lots of documents, right? There's tons of forms available in California around family law. And so having access to the form data or the file documents is very key. The judges in family law in particular like to do a lot of side-by-side document comparisons. So the system will default to them based on their clerk preferences or clerk's completion, what documents are going to show up by default for them. If they only want to see one, they can just look at one. The 2 documents work really well if you have a really large monitor, right? So most of the judges aren't using it on the bench. I think we have a couple that have the big monitor on the bench. Most of them use the side-by-side viewing when they're in chambers. But it is a feature that's available to them. And we do organize the documents slightly differently by default in family law. Those judges wanted to see the documents clustered by the document type or the filing type. Whereas the civil judges just wanted to see things in reverse chronological order. The family law judges wanted to see clusters of documents. So one of those interesting learnings that you get when you're working through the system. So Civil ELF is the last one. It's very similar to Family ELF. It has the same sort of initial orientation, if you will, on the top level. When you drill into a case in civil, more real estate is dedicated to the document, right? Because civil is predominantly driven by the document. And because the document is so important, we actually introduced this notion of a prepped case file. So there's the document that was filed, the causal document that put the hearing on the calendar to begin with, and that automatically gets prepped. So if a judge opts for a prepped view, at a minimum, they'll see that document. But certain judges have certain preferences. So this particular judge always likes to see the complaint and any amendments to the complaint, even if it was done 3 years ago, in that quick view prep list, and then the documents that were most recently submitted. But if they want to click over to see everything, they can just do the all button and they see everything. So it's one of those little features that is really meaningful to judges. It's funny. So our presiding judge at the time who sponsored this project was, I don't like this notion of prepped at all. I want to see every single document available in reverse chronological order, and I'll figure out what I want to do. Right? Then we have other judges that are like, there's 65 documents on this case. I don't want to look at all 65 to find the 3 documents I care about. I love this, this case prep, right? So how do you build a system that accommodates both? You just accept that that's going to be your reality and you make it so. Okay, so one of the other things that's unique about the Civil ELF experience is that there's a heavy partnership with the court clerk and the research attorney. Right? So to the extent that it's a filing or an event that has a research attorney write-up associated with it, there's a little green icon up there on the very top of the front screen. The judge can say, okay, there's the research attorney write-up available. I can click down into it. The research attorneys are actually developing all of their write-ups through a SharePoint application that we've built and run sort of parallel to it. But from the judge's perspective, they don't know. Right? They just see a unified experience. Everything I need is available to me at one time. All right, so the lessons learned on the ELFs. Yes, sir. Yeah, right. Yeah, so the question was around the fact that I was characterizing Civil as being a more collaborative decision support tool, and the collaboration, as is being pointed out, is internal to the court, so it's not collaboration with justice partners or anything like that. We haven't built to that extent of collaboration yet. Maybe we'll get that in our criminal ELF product, but it's mostly around the internal communications between judge, research attorney, clerk. Okay. Yes, sir.
My first question goes back to that slide that we talked about having civil cases prepped for individual judges. That seems like an awful lot of individualization. And I think you may be answered it by this research attorney. So is it their responsibility to prep these cases? But earlier, you're from Orange County,
Yep.
and the session earlier in the morning was talking about electronic filing and using ELF to reduce the number of your full-time equivalent employees. I mean, who's got a resource of having research attorneys that can evidently do whatever it is they're doing? I mean, most jurisdictions don't have that kind of resource. How do you justify the human resources that appears to be needed for this whole system?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I'll let my boss answer that question if I'm not complete with my answer here. In general, the way that we designed the system and the way that civil operations worked circa 2008 in Orange County was there was a courtroom clerk, there was a courtroom attendant, there were research attorneys assigned, and the three of them made the judge's team, right? And the person that did the prepping work was the courtroom assistant, right? And their job was to know the unique preferences of the judges. The system automatically will build a recommended list of prep documents, but there are a handful of judges that, because of individual nuance, want it their way. And we decided to try to accommodate them because we were trying to drive judicial adoption. Now, interestingly, as I'm going to talk to you in a second, Civil ELF would be the one that I would say was our not so successful ELF. About half of the bench has embraced that tools, and there's probably a lot of reasons why that I'm not going to get to because I'm being filmed. But the other ELFs, we had tremendous success in, but I'm going to let my boss, this is Alan.
These are direct calendar, complex, over $50,000 cases. So the team he's talking about, we had a court assistant, a courtroom clerk, and a research attorney for the judges. There isn't a one-to-one research attorney-judge ratio. It's less than that. There's 3 research attorneys on a floor with 4 judges kind of a thing. So it's less than full-time on the research attorneys. But yeah, it's a lot of research attorney support. But it makes the judges more efficient, in our opinion. So that's a trade-off. And we haven't gotten new judgeships for years. So we're getting more work out of the judges we got. We have no bailiffs, no deputy sheriffs in our civil departments. Our trade-off there was instead of a bailiff, we have a court assistant who's a whole lot cheaper than a bailiff and does the prep work and handles juries and handles documents that come in during trials. So we've kind of merged and stolen or repurposed things to do this. And as Snorri says, some of it, you can set up the system to automatically prep some stuff, but it does take somebody sitting there saying, okay, the judge likes to see this, this, and this on a motion. So they identify those as the prep thing. But you also have to remember there's no paper. So there's nobody fooling around with files, paper files. There's no organizing them, lining them up, going and getting the one that's missing, waiting for the document that come in late. That's all gone because it's all electronic. So it's right there when you want it. A new document that comes, even if it's late, they were talking about this morning, that'll come up and you'll know about it, that it's there late. So that's even better than the paper system. So there's a lot of trade-offs. It's not really a whole lot of resources when you realize you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this, but we do have this and this kind of a thing.
Yeah, what?
You answered my first 2 questions. How did you convince the judges to get rid of bailiffs?
To convince them to what?
How did you convince the judges to do without the bailiffs?
Do without the bailiffs? Oh, that's a
Oh.
whole other session.
We're down 20% in money. That's an easy call. They don't like it, but we don't have bailiffs. We haven't had bailiffs for years in our civil departments.
So one of the other, just if I can add one more thought on the prep file, one of the other benefits of it, and this was one of the ways, I mean, we got rid of all of the paper handlers, as Alan is saying, right? So there's no paper file that's maintained. We still print a ton of paper, right? So certain judges are allowed to say, you know what, I want the paper. Well, we're not going to print out for that judge an entire case file. So that's one of the benefits of the prepping, is that the clerk's office can tag which documents are going to be needed by the judge because they want that physical paper, and it's not very eco-sensitive of us, but we print out all of those documents, the judge has them for that hearing, and then we toss them afterwards. But we saved so much money in terms of labor associated with managing the paper case file that it was worth it. And so that was one of the other sort of benefits of this prepping notion, was to get the paper available to the judge. So, Paul, you had something?
Yeah,
So outside of the scope of Orange County, that's the nice part that I like about decision support systems and metrics, because you make them work to fit the governance requirements of a particular jurisdiction. That's just a perfect example, right? This is how we decided to do it, and the DSS, the system, follows that and helps and assists and supports. Now, I've seen sort of other approaches out there where people didn't quite have the resources to put something like this together, and what they have done is they actually implementing instant messaging and things like that inside their on-the-bench applications. So for quick support, real time, that's how you work in most offices in the private sector, and some of the judges like that. And there's been requests for that. This is, again, whatever the local legal climate has to do and what they prefer, which is the nice part about doing things like that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So some quick lessons learned that we got after building the first wave of ELVs was, really understand the nature of the decision that's being made. We have 3 ELVs because traffic, family, and civil are just different beasts, right? The way the judges interact with the information is different, and we're not going to try to force all of them to use one tool. And then, pull as much information together as possible, but, organize it so it's not overwhelming. Second one was the judicial involvement is required. As I mentioned, just phenomenal success with family and traffic. The judges live and breathe by that product. And so much so that in family law, which I'm going to talk to in a slide, we're going to move to a new case management system, and the judges looked at the vendor's judicial support tool and said, you know what? I like our product better. The vendor came in, did an assessment, says, you know what, your product is better. You should go that way. Civil, we weren't as successful. We're still trying to crack this nut, right? So the civil, about half the bench, they all have accounts. They all look at it occasionally, but still about half the bench insists on having, we call them skinny files, but having all of that paper printed for them, for each hearing. The third lesson learned was optimize for the intended audience. So this is a judicial support tool, right? Once you roll this tool out, the operations folks, the research attorneys, lots of people want it, right? Even agency partners, they see it and they said, we want this tool. And then they start saying, and we want this feature added. And we constantly tell them no. Right? If you want your own decision support tool, we'll build you one of those. But this is a tool optimized for the judge. So we're always sort of fighting back that temptation to turn the tool into something else, but we're not going to do it because we don't want to dilute the judicial experience. Some things that we're doing next on this front. Criminal ELF is our last ELF. We haven't built that guy yet. Criminal is the one case type that we have that is still paper-based. We still maintain paper case files. So we're getting ready for a launch of Criminal ELF next year. We're in the process right now of scanning all of the case files, which is how we built all the other ELFs, right? Before you have e-filing, you have to do scanning. So we're in the process of building up that digital inventory, if you will, or library of things. We are working on a new case management system that we expect to launch somewhere in late 2014, early 15. As I mentioned, in the family law side, the judges overwhelmingly, unanimously endorsed, keeping our existing ELF, so we're going to adapt it to the new case management system. The juvenile judges want to kick the tires a little bit on that workbench tool. There's just some things that they think are interesting about it, so we'll see. The jury's still out on that one, as it were. So switching gears a little bit now, so moving from judge decision support into operational decision support, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing around e-filing. I think this is a very appropriate thing. This is a Web 2.0 conference, and the new metrics for a Web 2.0 world are around, electronic information movement, right? So a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, the California Assembly passed AB 2073, which was going to authorize Orange County as a pilot court in California to be the first county to have the authority to mandate e-filing in civil matters. And it went into effect on January 1st. It had a couple of strings attached to it, one of them being that we had to have multiple e-filing service providers. So that's the person that the legal secretary actually interacts with, the ProPer interacts with. So we actually have like 11 of them running right now, with a couple more being added this month. Our goal for approaching the legislature about this idea and getting the assemblymen to help sponsor the bill was all about money, right? So again, we're still constantly reacting to year-over-year budget cuts, and we needed to make this work. When you look at it from a governance perspective, though, this is really a nightmare for me and the operations folks that are giving the presentation down the hall. Because not only do we have to make Alan happy and my presiding judge happy, now I've got the entire Judicial Council looking over my shoulder to see, okay, how is this thing working in Orange County? Are you doing well? And so we are very, very pleased with the results that we've had to date. We're a little over 6 months into it. The Judicial Council, or the Assembly bill, also required the Judicial Council form a committee of oversight, that they work to establish uniform statewide e-filing rules, that they had like 18 months to do it. They were supposed to wait until the end of the pilot period to evaluate, but they were so confident in the success that we were having in Orange County, and I'll show you some stats on that in a little bit, that they went ahead and adopted the rules. So 6 months into our pilot program that was supposed to last for 18 months, now every county in California has the authority to mandate e-filing in civil matters under certain, if they meet certain conditions. Okay? So the Judicial Council is doing, their evaluation, or they'll be doing an evaluation on us, and I'm sure we'll have a wonderful report to share with the world, afterwards. But that's one of the challenges around, governance in here. To give you a little more context about e-filing in Orange County, we do a lot of e-filing. We have 4 different case types, if you ignore the stuff we're doing in criminal with the district attorney, that are doing some level of e-filing activity right now. Other than civil, it's voluntary everywhere else. And you can sort of see that reflected in the numbers, right? The percentage of documents e-filed is 95% in civil, and then it drifts down as you move to the right. The legislation that just passed gave us the authority to mandate e-filing in probate matters. So we will do that beginning in September, so we'll see that number jump up. As I mentioned, the primary motivation for mandating this was money. We determined out through some studies that, a very simple metric is $2 a document. So every document that's electronically filed saves the court $2 in labor, right? That's labor associated with doing data entry off of the form, scanning it, associating the document with the case record and the register of action, right? All of that work, on average, takes $2 in labor effort to accomplish. So you extrapolate the numbers out, and you can see just in civil alone, we're going to get almost $2 million in annualized savings by this mandated e-filing activity. It's 95% and not 100% because self-represented litigants, when we started the pilot, could opt out. And the new law that just went into effect July 1st is that by default, they are not mandated to e-file. They have to opt in to e-filing. And that was very interesting, just completely anecdotal and unrelated. Orange County originally was advocating the legislature and the Judicial Council, highly to make everything mandatory because we wanted to get every dollar in savings that we could possibly achieve. But then we realized we started running into challenges because each judicial officer could make their own judgments and determinations on whether or not they were going to grant an exemption to the e-filing. And sometimes those exemptions made a lot of sense, and sometimes they seemed a little bit odd, and we were starting to fear that we were going to lose in the public opinion poll if, a judge said, nope, you have to e-file even though you say that you can't because, you drive a nice car and we're going to make you e-file, right? I'm being facetious, but, you get the idea. So we wanted to pull that risk out of the equation. Okay. So if you look at e-filing now, and this isn't a session on e-filing, so I promise I'll get to dashboards in a second, but if you look at e-filing end-to-end as a business process, it's really complicated, right? There's 18 steps involved in e-filing as the filer submits a document to the EFSP and it moves around. So the top half of that chart there, it's an eye chart, I know, shows everything that happens between the filer and the vendor, right? The e-filing service provider, or EFSP. The bottom half of the slide is everything that happens inside the court. Once the electronic document and data is delivered to the court until it works its way all the way through the system and gets filed. And then you return the documents back up if they're conformed, you settle the monies, right? So there's a lot of moving parts in this. So as you start to think about operational dashboards and metrics in this new world, you start to look at this and you say, okay, where are the points that we want to focus on, right? So you start driving to metrics. And it turns into some very interesting conversations at a court, leadership level, right? So the first question that we came to was, what is an acceptable turnaround time? So from the time the person on the top there submits their document and hits send to the court until they get the conformed copy back, what do we think is an acceptable cycle time, right? The internet age has this weird sense of immediacy, right? So the operations people in this room will say, there's no way it's going to happen immediately, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes on to evaluate the, the accuracy of the filing, right? You have to have the staff in place, to process the work that's coming in. Some documents require judge signatures, right? So they have to go through a separate work product, right? And we don't want our courtroom operations people saying, hey, judge, you really need to get that signature done because we're on the clock here, right? That's not going to work, right? So we just acknowledge that, things are different. So you start to drive to this notion that, okay, it's not going to be immediate, it's going to be something less than immediate, okay? Then you ask the question, are all documents created equally, right? And so we came to a determination through a set of dialogues that no, they're not, right? Some documents are really time sensitive, right? So an unlawful detainer document is important, right? Somebody might get evicted from a house. Therefore, we need to make sure that if we're hitting a backlog of some sort, we need a way to marshal our resources against those UD filings so that we can bring it down to ensure that we're going to process them within 24 hours. And maybe there's a writ filing that's not as important, and we can push that one down to lower in the queue. So if we're forced to prioritize, we started to make that determination. We went through and said, okay, these are the ones that we need to prioritize. Now, what was interesting is that the pressure points that we were feeling were different, right? So unlawful detainers, because people's lives are impacted, right? New cases was because of the media, right? The media wants to know the second any new case is filed against any big company, and so they're constantly pressuring us to turn things around very quickly. You can go through there and just see the different types that we deemed more important than the others. Then the third question that emerged, we had a lot of questions, but it really bubbled down to three sort of core ones, were do all documents require human review, right? In the paper counter world, right, every document got filed over the counter to a clerk, and a clerk reviewed and stamped every document, and so that was just part of the process. Every document got touched by a human. But then we started to realize that, there are a whole slew of documents, proofs of service being sort of the most, obvious one, where the court's role really is just to lodge the fact that we got this document recorded in the Register of Actions and make the document available if somebody wants it. If there's a problem with it, the opposition's going to point it out to us, right? But all we're doing is we're saying, yep, we got it. It's in there. We're not going to read through the document and make sure that they spelled the address correctly or any of those types of things. And so that's what one of the other sessions that's going on right now is talking about, which was how we sort of embrace this notion of automated clerk review. Okay, so then when you take that step back, you look at the process, four broad categories of metrics emerge, right? So overall, what's your volume so that you can, do your staffing better, right? What's your backlog so you have a sense on, do I need to apply more resources to something? If you start to split document or filings out by type, you build these things called work queues, right? And so you want to staff your work queues appropriately. And then this notion of a turnaround time metric, right? So how fast can we turn these documents around? So again, my Winnie slide, here's all the technology that comes into play in our operational dashboarding, environment. I'm not going to talk to all of them. Really, the two most important products really on that board are the SharePoint dashboard. So we use a product called Microsoft SharePoint for our intranet site and internal collaboration. And of course, Microsoft Excel, right? I mean, it's the tool that everybody uses for analysis. And so we're just embracing it. Now, underneath the covers, Microsoft introduced this product called, this capability called Power Pivot. So if you're an Excel Power user and you've ever used something called a pivot table in Excel, all Microsoft has done was push that pivot table capability down one layer so it can interact with databases, right? So you're not restricted to having all your data in a worksheet and then building your drill downs. You can actually build the linkage into the actual case management databases themselves. So lots of moving parts here again. This is complex. If you're not a technologist, don't go back to your shop and say, hey, Orange County built this decision support tool and it's all magical and it works great. It takes a lot of engineering to, to make these things happen. But as you start to then move through the discussion, right, the thing that's powerful about dashboards is that their visual cues prompt action, right? So in our world, it's going to be all about the dots, right? A green dot means all is good. A red dot means things are in trouble. Yellow means, hey, you may want to give some attention to it. So if you're looking at the dots in that context and you say, okay, what is, I'll use unlawful detainer sort of down there at the second row as my example. our goal is to turn around an unlawful detainer filing within 12 hours of it coming to the court. If we have UD documents that are over 12 hours, but under 24 hours, the dashboard is going to show yellow, right? If you have things that are over 24 hours, it's going to show red. And the whole point is when the operations person sees it, they can then take action against that. So you have some very interesting discussions with the operations around that question of immediacy, right? How fast do I actually need to turn things around so that my customers will still be satisfied with the results? And I'm the annoying person that's the internet age guy that says, you operations people need to turn around things, everything around instantaneously, and meanwhile Alan is cutting the resources left and right, and we have to figure out, okay, what's that acceptable balance, right? And it's a balancing act, but we think we guessed pretty closely on what the right answer was. And so this was, in general, the turnaround goals that we have. You may be thinking, oh my gosh, 72 hours, that's horrible. That's what I thought. But we'll see I was wrong. Then you get to some dashboarding around metrics, right? So we maintain a backlog of about 6,000 documents in the queue at any given moment in time, right? That's just the reality, right? Based on the volume that comes in. So we then also in the same vein went through and said, okay, if we have more than 250 or if we have less than 250 UD filings in our work queues, then we're okay. Right? Well, that's just normal course of business. We can process that much work within that 24-hour window. But if it moves, beyond that, that might be a sign of, concern that we may want to take some action against. If it goes above 735, these seem like very arbitrary numbers to me, but our operations people are very proud of these numbers, so I accept it. Then it's going to flag, the dot will flag red. So here's the first example of a high-level dashboard that they'll see. So this is actually real data from our court last week. And you can see that at the time of me grabbing the screenshot, we had a whole lot of documents in backlog, right? 11,000 documents in backlog. Something strange happened over here, right, that caused the volume to rise up, right? Could be vacations, could be an influx of filing volume. Not sure what it is just yet, but again, that's the power of these dashboarding tools. Because I can look at this and say, okay, I want to now drill down and see more information about what's going on. Now, before I go into the drill downs, one of the other things that's very important from my perspective, very selfishly as the IT person, is this notion of in the queue, right? So I want them to see at any moment in time what's the last document that came in from any case type electronically. So the fact that something came in 3 minutes ago is a pretty good indication that all systems are operational, right? But every once in a while, they'll get into a panic attack and think, oh my gosh, we're not seeing the volumes, or, the judge is complaining that some document isn't being turned around in time. Is it possible that the system has gone down, right? This is a way for us very quickly operationally for them to get assurance that, okay, things are working, right? So we should be seeing, something coming in about every minute or two. In that prior example, right, when we had the drill down, this is the next dashboard that you'll see, right? It's, okay, within the 7,000 or 11,000 that we had of documents in the queue, how do they distribute out, right? So 7,000 of them, the majority of them are in limited civil. Okay, that could be an indication based on our sort of dashboarding rules, that chart I showed you earlier, that's red, right? And that means attention required. We need to go do something about it. The probate ones are fine. There's 30 and 39 in the queue, no big deal. Oldest one is 18 hours, what's within our parameters, so all is good. So again, the power of the dashboard is bringing meaning to that dot, right? That dot has a lot of power behind it. If you want to drill down and see more information, right, this very much behaves like an Excel pivot table, right? You click on it and you can drill down and see actually the case specifics. It's an eye chart. You have to just trust me that it says that, but it actually shows the characteristics of the filing, right? This is the document that's in the queue, that's 128 hours long. It's one of these types of documents, and it's information. So again, the point of it is that the operations person then can take, some action against it. Again, back to the example of not all documents are created equal, the dashboard also needs to show those characteristics of those high priority documents. So at a glance, they can see, hey, something funny is going on in defaults and writs, right? So based on the parameters that we defined earlier, those are the 2 areas that are red. Those are the ones that are driving up the backlog. Let's go figure out, what it is that we need to do. So those are the real-time dashboard elements. We do some dashboarding that's a little bit broader, right? It shows week at a time, month at a time, or in aggregate, right? So these are really valuable as well. So this is actually the time of day that the e-filings were submitted to the court. And because of budget cuts, our court's operating hours are now 8 to 4 p.m. And you can see that most filing happens between 8 and 5, but a fairly large chunk of it, not surprisingly, happens between 4 and 5. So interestingly now, 25% of all filings that are done with the court happen outside of normal court operating hours. That's actually a huge win, right, in our story with the legislature on this program, right? We've reduced service, we've reduced access at one level physically, but virtually, we've accommodated it, right? People are filing at all hours of the day, and the legislation requires that a filing that comes in at 11:59 p.m. is deemed filed that day. So if there's anything time sensitive, they have it if they're confident that it's accurate. So then you get back to that question around turnaround time. So we've been monitoring this like crazy. It keeps moving back and forth, but if you look at all of the filings, on average, 25% of all the documents filed to the court get turned around within 4 hours. So we do a lot in that first block of time. In fact, most of those show up in that under 2 hours. And in all honesty, it's those auto clerk documents, right? They take 0 time, right? The second they're received, they process through, they're filed. But you can get a sense of where the operational drivers are. 0 to 8 hours, right? It's 27%. So about half of the documents get processed in under 24 hours. So again, from a layman's outside perspective, you think, boy, that's a horrible stat, right? You're really not doing our job. Well, part of our requirements for AB 2073 is that we have to report out satisfaction. We just completed a very expansive survey where we hit all of the e-filers up, a lot of self-represented litigants as well as the attorney filings, and it turns out that people are satisfied. Much to our delight, right? 68% of the people are satisfied or very satisfied at the processing time, right? So even though it's taking over 48 hours on average to turn around a document, and that sounds horrible, right? Practically speaking, our customers are thrilled, right? They think it's great because they measure time differently, right? In the old world, they would print it out, the court runner would come by, they'd take it off to their center, somebody would stand in line, they would get the conformed copy, right? In the paper world, right, it might take 5 days for the paper to work its way all the way back because they used an attorney service firm to do it, right? But now they get the sense that it's happening within 2 days, and they're getting real-time statuses, right? They can see that the document has been uploaded, the document has been filed at the court, or received by the court, the document has been filed, and processed at the court. So they get a lot more information, and these metrics now become a lot more meaningful. The other thing that was pleasantly surprising to us was that the e-filing moves the data entry labor from the courtroom or the courthouse to the filer, right? So in addition to uploading their documents, they're providing us a lot of case information, right? What's the case number? Who's the filing party? Who's this filed by? Things like that. And you're worried that they're going to get mad at you because we've shifted labor off to them, but the metrics actually showed the other thing. They're actually, happy. They think it's 60% of them think it's faster to do it through this e-filing method than it was to engage the other paper-based processes that were work. Now, our operations people, being what they are and who they are driven by perfection, and they want to excel. And so even though these are pretty good numbers, right, they're not happy. So they are looking for ways to drive these metrics even better, right? And so that's why we've been focusing on these dashboards and trying to drive changes. So things that we're doing operationally to take the data into action is around specialized work queues, right? So those document types that matter, right? We set up specialized work queues to handle those things so you get visibility of it. We know what the time of day the filings are coming in, so we can stagger our shifts. We can start people at 6 in the morning, to work 6 to 5 instead of the normal 8 to 5 hours. And by doing that, we drove the auto e-filing enhancement through. When we saw that as a big opportunity, we have these little blitz teams, as they call them, right? So if they realize, oh my gosh, we're really backed up on unlawful detainers, they can just get everyone around the county to work that queue until it gets down to an appropriate threshold. And then they're training like crazy so that the operations folks around the county can do more than one case type specialty as needed. So, the old adage is what gets measured gets done, and this is how they're using these tools in a real constructive manner. Okay. My last slide before I turn it back over to Paul is around governance in general, right? So whether it's judicial governance for judicial decision support tool or these operational ones, it's very important to understand the way our court runs, and I think some of the successes that we've had in the past are attributable to this. So governance really is focusing on three things, right? It's prioritization, right? Let's make sure that we're working on the right things. Let's make sure that we're doing it correctly, which is around delivery, and then managing risk. And so the way that we do this in Orange County for every single project, that's of decent size, or risk, is they go through a very formal prioritization process. So the reason why criminal ELF is going last was because our court in aggregate decided that we had bigger opportunities in the other case types, so that's where we focused. You need to ensure, one of the ways to ensure that the project is going to be delivered successfully is to get the judge sponsor involved. So every project has a judge sponsor. This AB 2073 thing had a couple of judges that were actively involved in what it was that we were doing on a day-to-day level so that they could report back up to the Judicial Council or the legislature or whoever was asking. It also does wonders in terms of driving adoption within the judges, right, within the panels. If a judge is advocating for it, they're more likely to be able to persuade their colleagues to use these tools. And so we have a very formal, what we call executive checkpoint process where we tee up just about every decision and make sure that the judges sign off on it so that there's complete ownership. And the judges are highly involved in mitigating the risk. So let me turn it over to Paul.
Well, thank you.
Yep.
Good.
One of the things we're struggling with in Missouri is judges want backup plans. If power goes out and everything's electronic, what do we do? How did you guys do that? How did you get on board? We've adopted a plan.
It's this, rubbing the rosary beads.
We have a recommendation.
Right.
You have options.
Yeah, it's. I will be honest. It's not where we want it, right? So I still have one point of risk, right? We've done all kinds of things to put redundancies in everywhere to minimize the occurrences that happen when the systems just become unavailable. And probably 99.9% of the time I've got it covered. But that one day when I don't have it covered, right, something bad happens. Yeah, I'm actually quite exposed right now. And so we're trying to build some capabilities in where we're going to push the documents down to their computer, right? Because all the judges have laptops, right? But laptops run on batteries, so I can run for an extra, 4 to 6 hours in worst case if I have to go that way. Yeah. 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 Yeah, and so the attorneys are our next backup plan, right? And so then the judge just says, hey, can you give me a copy of these documents, right? That happens. Because we've had I'll be honest, we've had a couple of outages that have happened in, my 8 years at the court. So it's just, part of doing business. But we are really working on trying to close that gap down. And that's the way that we're going to try to do it, is to make it local electronic copies. So if I lose connection to the internet, as long as I have some power from a battery, I can still run a courtroom.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have another 15 minutes or so we can, there's lots of opportunity to still ask some questions. We don't have a whole lot more, but I do want to touch on something here that I very informally listed. It covers a couple of things. Before we go into that, though, can I ask you guys to raise your hand, or whoever has an existing decision support project going or wants to get into one? Are there any takers here? No? Earlier, in the earlier session, there was a comment made, well, we're doing some of this because we must. We are being asked, and the question is actually not a real question, it's a directive. And we actually believe that these kinds of things apply to both, whether you do something because you want to, because you yourself have discussed a matter and have decided, hey, decision support may help us along, but also is valid for those situations where where you need to be responsive to someone else's demands on you, and you really don't have a choice. They really apply both ways. They're really about success in some ways, and making sure that how you intend to implement and what is success is defined based on what you have at your disposal, so it becomes more real. You may not have the means that Orange County has. You may not have Snorri or Alan or other people. You have your own people, right? And they have the same or other talent. So this is really about kind of making it practical. From my perspective, having worked in the court for 10 years, so feel free to criticize and tell me that is not what makes things work. The things that I found that one really needs to kind of think about and do early on is an articulation of something. It's a couple of things. They're pretty basic. I found that if any one of them is not there early on, it doesn't have to be there at the start, but certainly in the nascent, in the embryonic phase of something like this, if you're missing it later on, first of all, it's not just really difficult to get together, because everybody has a different perception of that, but also it really increases your likelihood of failure in these things. And lots of bad blood, and who wants that? So let me tell you what those are. They're all kind of no-brainers. The first one is really the problem or the opportunity. If you're being told by Central Judicial Council or AOC or legislature, whatever it is, to do X, Y, Z, can you articulate really what this is? And what does it mean for your court? So rather than saying, oh, I got to do this, and let's give somebody who I don't like very much the job of implementing that because nobody wants to, can I articulate this in a way that, can I connect the articulation with what my court's all about, what my size is all about, what my client's all about, my socio-demographic profile, the people that I serve, and the staff that I've got? Can I articulate that? Have I done something that is like a cause effect analysis, a fishbone thing, if you think about it visually, right? This should be the outcome. I'm doing X, Y, Z reporting, or I need to improve those kinds of metrics because I've been told. Have I really thought through all the different effects that come to bear in order to create these things or influence these numbers? Those are the two things that I would be looking for there. A related piece is, do I really know how my court operates? Well, you probably do. Do other people know that too? Can I communicate to someone else, even inside the court, how my court ticks? Is there a case flow diagram? Are there things that are easy to consume? I'm not talking about a handbook of 150 pages. I'm talking about something I can look at and within 10 minutes get the idea, aha, this is how we process criminal and traffic, right? The muster peers and so on. Is there such a thing? That's kind of part of that articulation. That also will give you measure points that may be potentially available to you to derive the metrics that you might need to provide evidence to what you're doing that you want to improve. So it's kind of a long sentence, I apologize for that. Is the problem that you're solving, is that worth for you? Does it have value if it went away? If you're being told to do something, there still is a value, I would argue. The value is in not in compliance, right? And there's a value. You should attach a value to that, because that makes it easier to communicate and get people to buy in. Does it have the legs, meaning can you sustain this piece over the anticipated time frame it might take to implement such a system? Or a small initiative around improving certain metrics or changing certain processes. It kind of works the same way. So this is a little bit about general project management as well. Who would lose and who would win if successful? If you don't do that early on, it's kind of strange, because most of us have this notion that, well, it's obvious. Well, it's not to other people. And when you don't articulate it, you never have a list of all the stakeholders together, and you never really think about, what is it really like on the other side for whoever is part of the process. I'm not just talking about courts. I'm talking about also your justice partners. If whatever it is that you are being told to do or have in mind touches them, and I guarantee you, if you are in anywhere not in civil, you have touch point. It's just the nature of the beast. In some jurisdictions, you have a lot of them because some jurisdictions share resources, social services and other county resources, and you need to take those into account. Not just that, but you need to allow them to come in and vet the thing out with you. So, a couple of pieces of articulation. I'm talking about a court that isn't very large. You should still do that, so you have something tangible, and as a communication base. The next category is, do I have something? Well, you gotta. This is the practical part. Well, do I have a project leader? You need a single person to deliver, right? I'm not talking about a techie. I'm talking about someone who is the go-to person, the lightning rod, the guy that's going to make it happen, the one that helps move things along and knows and feels responsible for it, right? Do I have such a project leader? Because we're dealing with judges, you want someone who also can either earn or commandeer or do both. Respect, right? You need that. If you don't have it, just don't just get started and say, somebody will show up. Because I guarantee you, once you get into it, you just don't have the time to get someone. And number two, you already have created momentum and you've already created perceptions with the stakeholders. It is really, really difficult to involve somebody later unless you declare them the Fred Adair, the guy that comes in and to tap off the oil well that's on fire, right? That is another approach. You can use that, but it's a little bit more risky in terms of political fallout. So make sure you've got a project leader that has the chops, if you will. The judges and the justice partners, and Snorri was talking about this earlier. I'm going to go on a limb a little bit and say, even if you're being told that you have to do something, and even if it is something where you say, well, this really doesn't touch the judges a whole lot, you still should go and get someone to support it. And the way I measure support is, are they prepared to openly talk about it in a favorable way? To me, a judge who nods when you talk about it, that's not support. That is maybe nice, right? And you might go, ooh, that's great. He didn't say anything, or she didn't say anything. But you want someone who speaks on your behalf, on the project's behalf. So if you don't have that, be worried. Same thing with the justice partners. If they're in on this, yes, you got to get their requirements. Yes, you got to invite them to vet what you have in mind. But you also want them to talk about it within their own organizations. If you don't have that, again, be worried. I'm not saying stop or run away. I'm simply saying be worried. If you're not worried at all, you will just breeze over it, and then 6 months later, it'll come back to bite you and everybody else around you. Not a good thing. And then the last one is sort of an interesting thing, the technical and data talent required. Actually, it's not so much the technical data, it's more the knowledge about information in your court that you need. Okay? So you don't need a pure techie. You don't need someone who can put together web pages on the fly or does HTML5 and knows a little bit about Flash, which is on the way out, by the way, for some of you that still want to do this. Because it doesn't allow a mobile experience. I've heard this being mentioned a couple of times. You want someone who understands the data from a business perspective, right? Someone who knows, I know data elements and data structures and that kind of stuff, but I also know the business context of these pieces and how they, if you map them out, how we can distill them into metrics so they're meaningful, because you're going to have to document this at one point. And possibly defend it, how you came to these metrics. Okay? So data is really important here. Don't do that. Don't start without this. And then the third one really is about your personal chutzpah, I suppose. Am I prepared to do two things? you as a project sponsor or as a boss or as a department head, you're not necessarily the project manager. You're just responsible for this or have capital invested in that. Are you prepared to see this through? I guarantee you, if you're not, and I've seen this too, where people go into this and say, oh, about halfway through, I'm going to pass this on to someone. The projects don't work the same way. It just comes through. So don't just do it. Find someone else immediately. There's no shame in delegating, really. And if you don't have the resources, then make sure that you do in your analysis of what's available, that you consider that, and then you say, okay, I'm doing this under certain circumstances, and you disclose those. I mean, folks in the courts, we work with each other, over a long period of time. I think we are able to do that with each other in most jurisdictions. And one other thing, and this kind of tags back to what Snorri said about when things kind of get put together and you begin to see what this final thing might look like, and people get excited, and other groups of people see it as well, you get all kinds of requests, right? And of course, because we all support us and help us, we all in support functions in a way, the initial momentum will be, or the tendency will be, well, let's go and make them happy to some extent. And Snorri said, well, yeah, we can, but through a different project, right? So it's clear this is a separate thing. I will also then add to this and say you have to almost steel yourself. You might fully understand what the needs are and be very sympathetic to those. But you almost need to make sure that yourself, you kind of stay the course of why you're doing this in the first place. And it's not about the ideas of the team. The implementation is about the team and how they approach it. But it's really to serve someone else's needs. And it's usually the judges or an operations manager or the court as a whole. So you really need to say, what I believe is important that I want to bring it in. But at the end of the day, and I have not seen a single project where that didn't become an issue at one time or another, I really, really now again need to open my mind to what those guys really tell me that they need. And if they don't tell me what they need, I really need to go after them and create a situation where they are more likely to tell me what they need. Right? Maybe sometimes that means showing them something that they won't need. They just don't know it yet. Okay, so please don't forget that. This is really important early on. You should do it a couple of times as you move forward. Those are just some soft items that we make. Most projects work or not, but particularly for decision support systems where you really cater to the local climate, this is pretty important. Do you guys have any questions on that? The soft side of stuff? No? Any questions about decision support overall as far as the session is concerned for today? Yes?
How do you, in particular, survey the public with what you guys are doing? Because that's part of the project, basically.
Yeah, so the question was, how do we go about surveying the public? In the case of e-filing, what's great is that everybody that e-files has to submit to us an email address so that we have a way to conduct e-service. So we basically just went through and grabbed every email address that we did and sent out this big monster spam and said, this is from the court and we'd really like your input on this on this survey. That's the first time we've ever done it that way. In the past, what we've done is you hire a bunch of college interns and you have them get people as they're walking in and out of the doors. But yeah, in this particular case, it was an email with a link to an electronic surveying tool, and then our statisticians then started combing through the data.
With the survey, we have public representatives and then attorney representatives, so they're all part of the decision-making process.
Yeah. So the point was that in this world, right, sometimes it's an attorney that's related, and sometimes it's a self-represented party. And that was very interesting to us because we were able to distinguish the self-represented litigants from the attorney filers. And surprisingly, the results were very similar. The self-representatives were very, very happy. In fact, after the first session, because Susan from Minnesota was out in the audience, I knew that she was going to come hit me up for give me your statistics on self-represented litigants, because it is voluntary for them, but they're overwhelmingly positive. The numbers were almost identical. They just skewed, 1 or 2% for the self-representatives, and that's a good sign, right? Because it's optional for them. Okay, so there's our contact info. If you want to shoot either of us a note, and then.
Oh yeah, I forgot about this one. So for those of you who know Star Trek, we certainly do. We took one of Data's quotes and we changed a capital D to a small caps D, and this is the result. We think it's absolutely surreal, and we wanted to enlighten you a little bit with
and
that.
we're a little geeky. We acknowledge
Yes.
it.
So again, thank you very much for the last hour and a half that we spent together. Thank you.